Years ago, there was a guy I liked, but I couldn't pronounce his name. I learned about Barack Obama. Let's get the slide up, because it makes more sense. I learned about Barack Obama on MySpace, and I referred to him for over a week as Barack Obama. Now, I wasn't a particularly hopeful person back then. I struggled quite a bit with my mental health. So it's interesting to actually look back and realize that Barack Obama's message of hope appealed to me and countless other cynical people. And I think there's a takeaway in that. Research actually shows that you don't have to be a hopeful person for a hopeful message to appeal to you. Now, years later, I find myself serving as a climate advisor at the Obama White House. And there's one night I'm at my desk. It's 3 a.m. Now, usually a lot of team members I had were at our offices then, but this one night, I'm alone. And I'm feeling really frustrated because we're trying to do everything we can to move climate action forward, and we're facing tremendous obstruction from Congress. And then I have an epiphany. My theory of change starts to evolve in a moment, where we know that we can't solve the climate crisis without systemic change. And you can't get systemic change without electeds. And you can't get electeds until you get the people on board. And here was my realization. You can't expect to have the people on board until they feel something. And that last part, that people need to feel something in order to act, I realized that might be key. The idea that what we could do in the halls of the White House could come down to, by transitive property, a human feeling, was something I had never considered. I start looking into psychology research, and one thing is very clear. Fear, guilt, shame, which I had seen dominate the climate narrative for decades, is actually antithetical to human motivation and long-term action. It actually paralyzes people into not doing much. Now, also, there exists the science of hope, an emerging area of positive psychology backed by over 2,000 published research studies. Hope is extremely tied to motivation. In fact, if you have a goal, it's been shown, proven, to be one of the most efficient ways to realize it. So the question is, what can hope actually do? The research here is pretty profound. Hope is associated with everything from cancer patients living longer, to childhood trauma survivors having significantly better life outcomes, to a lower divorce rate among high-hope couples. In fact, the biggest predictor of longevity, one of them is how much hope you have. This means something, right? And so I started to realize that maybe there were some applications. Hope is specifically not a feeling or an emotion. It's also not a temperament. It's not like some people are born more hopeful than others. No, hope is a mindset. It's a tool, and therefore it can be learned, and therefore it can be spread. So hope gets misconstrued with a lot of other things, so I'm going to define it for you very clearly, how psychology defines it and how it's measured. Hope is specifically the belief that the future can be better and that you have the agency to make it better. Now, this is what actually differentiates hope from optimism. Optimism shows up in the research as the belief that the future will be better, period. It's this idea that good things happen to you, good things happen in the world, things work out in the end. Now, there's been quite a bit of pushback to climate optimism. And to be honest, I think I can understand where people are coming from sometimes. Climate optimism is associated with people feeling good, better about the future. But climate hope is associated with people working collectively to create that better future. Hope requires agency. That's what differentiates it from optimism. Now, in the climate space, we're working on a uniquely complex problem, and our workforce is facing a unique type of anxiety and at risk for a unique type of burnout. Hope actually has vast applications here. So I'm going to talk about 3 strategies for creating a more hopeful workforce on climate. And there are many others, so if you're interested in this, come talk to me after. I just can't put them all in. All right. One thing we know is that when you increase the hope level of employees, all of these things happen. Retention, productivity, and job satisfaction, just as a start, increase. Now, I had been focused for a while on climate communications and storytelling, as well as like corporate climate strategy, and then I found myself in this space because of its potential to have big impact. Now, what are the building blocks of hope? It starts with an accurate appraisal of the problem. Anything that minimizes the problem or just says, look at the bright side, there are good things happening too, that's by definition not hope. It's looking straight at the problem. It's starting there. Now, it's comprised of three things. First, goals. Goals need to be feasible and desirable. Second, agency, willpower. It's your energy to take action. And the third is pathways, strategy. That's your roadmap for action. So strategy one for creating a more hopeful workforce in climate is empower individuals with a sense of control. The more people feel a sense of control over their work and lives, the higher their level of agency, the higher their hope level, and the likelier they are to be able to realize their goals. Consider goals, agency, and pathways your formula for spreading hope. And the amazing thing about this is when we talk about hope as a tool, you can actually look at any life outcome, professional outcome that you don't like through the lens of a hope framework and figure out what between goals, agency, and pathways is breaking down. It's usually one of them. And that changes the intervention or the solution you provide, and it can increase the likelihood that you will get the outcome you desire. Now, there's amazing research on people's bosses. Research actually shows that employees who have a boss that makes them feel hopeful are more innovative, productive. They're likelier to stay with an organization more than 2 years. They're more committed to their jobs and they work harder. And on the other side, employees who have a boss that does not make them feel hopeful are at the counter on almost all those metrics. Now, I want to be clear, this is not talking about an employee's individual hope level. No. This is about whether or not their boss gives them hope and how that impacts them personally. Strategy two for creating a more hopeful workforce on climate is embodying hope, inspires hope. It is hard to spread what you do not have. This is one of the most validated parts of the hope research. Now, at the White House, we wanted to understand what the most effective way to frame climate change was because we realized we actually weren't sure. My colleague Rohan Patel actually led this research. And we tested all of the different frames that are put out there. We found something really surprising. The most effective way to frame climate change was not through the lens of climate-related disasters, or national security, or the macroeconomy, or even the environment. The most effective way to frame climate change by far was through the lens of public health. Now, it was only a few years ago where I looked back and I realized that public health was the only hope frame we had tested. Because when you talk about climate change in terms of pollution, there's a counter, which is a land of clean air. And we were focused a lot on the process. What are we doing? What's happening? But we realized there was an opportunity to talk about where that was getting us. What was it going to look like to open your eyes in that world that we were creating together? And so we started writing it down with this hope-based climate narrative on public health. As we deploy more clean energy across the country, there will now be children who never have to know the pain and fear of an asthma attack. Parents who now get to be there to watch their children graduate, get married, whose lives would have otherwise been cut short from breathing pollution. We know that as we deploy more electric vehicles that are now coursing through the streets, communities who live near highways and have had to breathe traffic-related pollution have now been freed from the burden of a rising Alzheimer's rate. People now get to watch their parents grow old with minds clear and memories vivid. We know that this is the transformative power of what happens when we restore collectively people's right to clean air and an environment free of harm. It's the promised land. So strategy 3 on creating a more hopeful workforce is show the promised land, tell them it's coming. Talk about it in terms of inevitability. And this is also relevant for whatever your organization's mission statement is. Talk about what it looks like once your mission statement has been realized. What's it feel like to live in that world? Now, the amazing thing about hope is that it spreads. It spreads across people, and it spreads across domains. In fact, one of the most valuable resources we have within our organizations are hopeful employees because they come in and they spread it. You can probably attest to a personal experience with this, with someone you know, right? Somebody you've worked with. Maybe you've been that person. So the question becomes, what if? What if we can use the power of hope to change how people feel and to change how they show up to help solve collectively the greatest crisis of our time? We might find that in addition to the work we do today, helping build a more hopeful climate workforce alongside that might be some of the most important work of our career. Thank you all so much.